Hello, friends of Studio Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it's coffee time, where I go over some of the stuff that's going on in the news since I was last on, and it's been a while since I've last on, mostly because I'm moving apartments. I think I mentioned that before. So that's really put a damper on some of my time to be able to come and do these shows, but I assure you we're getting right back into it as soon as I get settled in the new apartment. We've got several new Flamengo files coming up. That'll be of great interest to a lot of Janice's, all of Janice's fans, and they are always illuminating. So, without any further ado, I'm going to jump into the material here that I have for today, and it's a lot to do with the critical race theory, the shootings in both Atlanta and Boulder, and how the media is playing that out. So let's have a look at some of that material right straight away. At first, the title of this session is All Criminals Are White, Especially If They're Not. And this comes out every time that there is a major crime in the news, so it's not surprising that it also came out this particular time. But this is a quote directly from a tweet from Titania McGrath, who I'm sure you all know, and if you don't, you should check her out on Twitter. Very humorous, always has the right turn of phrase to point out the double standards and the ridiculous nature of where hatred and racism truly lies in our culture, and that's with the left, specifically with feminism and all of its derivatives like Black Lives Matter, which is, as I've pointed out many times, a feminist group, not a black group. Let's move on here. This is a tweet from Kamala Harris, back from when Jussie Smollett did his little lying, manipulative trick on the American people by pretending that he was assaulted by two white supremacists. And Kamala Harris immediately said, Jussie Smollett is one of the kindest, most gentle human beings I know. I'm praying for his quick recovery. This one was an attempted modern-day lynching. No one should have to fear for their life because of their sexuality or color of their skin. We must confront this hate. Is Kamala Harris confronting the implicit hate in Jussie Smollett's actions in trying to smear the all white people as being white supremacists and attacking him and getting profit and fame off of that? No, Kamala Harris, like all like her, is silent on that, where the true hatred lies. The true attack is lying in Jussie Smollett's action. And I take this next one, which is from, I believe, a relative of Kamala Harris's, Mina Harris, who says immediately after the Atlanta shooting, the shooting was not even a week ago, this is after the Boulder shooting, sorry, violent white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country. Incredible that they get away with this, almost unchallenged in today's world. The true target of the overwhelming majority of hatred and racism and sexism in North America can be identified as hatred of white people, hatred of men, and a hatred of old people too, but to a lesser degree. The target of, and the socially accepted target of hatred in North America and the Western culture in general is men and white people. Here, this is from a woman named Jory Mika, tweeted out almost right away. All white men must turn in their guns until we figure out what the hell is going on. White men. Every opportunity they get. And here, this is the contrast from this senator, and I forget his name now. Somebody out there must remember this fellow's name. He's a House representative, I think, or a congressman. I can't remember. We must have a federal license and ID for gun owners. Voter ID laws are racist and discriminatory. Isn't that amazing? You don't need any ID, according to these people, to vote, but you need ID to exercise your constitutional right to bear arms. And this guy got elected. Now, before we get on to the other stuff, there is a couple of interesting little things I wanted to quote on or comment on that I ran across also recently. This goes back 3 years almost, from Glamour magazine, and it speaks volumes It speaks volumes to our culture's treatment of men and boys compared to women and girls. This woman proudly stated how she got a $650 penis facial, she calls it, and my skin has never looked better. This is from May 4th, 2018. But I find it was worth going over again to remind you just the way we are viewed. And this is the woman here. I presume this is after her little penis facial. And quoting from the article, it's got the celebrity price tag to match at $650, but that's a small price to pay for skin that's paparazzi ready, seeing as I had a trip to Paris. The poor dear, the oppressed young girl. She's a young girl, she's spending $650 to have a facial, and she's on her way to Paris. That's what oppression looks like to a feminist. Seeing as I had a trip to Paris coming up that I was hoping to look impossibly fresh for, that's one of the concerns of oppressed people, looking impossibly fresh, I jumped at the opportunity to give it a whirl. Well, you would, because you're an oppressed girl. Now, listen to this sentence, or this paragraph, I should say. This is really, really revealing. Now, before you clutch your pearls, thinking that I had baby foreskin rubbed into my face, rest easy. The foreskin is collected during circumcision. Oh, you didn't. It would actually have been kinder to just rub the intact foreskin, actually, instead of mutilating the baby in order to get that perfect glow. But in any case, let's read on. At which point the stem cells are extracted through a centrifuge. They are then propagated to create more cells, and those stem cells and peptides are what are rubbed into your skin during the facial. The atelier claims they help plump your skin and make you glow. Before you clutch your pearls there, sweetie, let's have a look at what it means to be circumcised. I should have warned you about this. Folks, if you're queasy about this, and if you've ever seen video or photos of circumcision, it is, in one word, gruesome. But according to this oppressed woman paying $650 to rub the amputated member of a baby into her skin, a baby boy, into her skin, so she can jet off to Paris looking all impossibly fresh. It's clutching pearls to be concerned about this, apparently. It's clutching pearls to her, and that's how she views baby boys. Until we call these people out for what they are, we're going to be subjected to this cruelty, this gruesome, antiquated, ancient, gruesome process. And these feminists call it clutching pearls. So oppressed are they. Let's read on here. While gross factors hold promise, we don't yet have enough data to say they definitely work better than traditional treatment like retinol or lasers. However, they are extremely safe, and the only risk is to your pocketbook because they can be pricey. The only risk is not to the baby who you mutilate by dismembering his privates. No, that's not a risk. That's extremely safe. And they don't even have data to show that it's effective. But celebrities endorse it. Celebrities like Oprah Winfrey and a bunch of others. Let's read on. Arrived at blah, blah, blah. My esthetician walked me through the whole process. You've got to hold a hand for these oppressed people. It's not easy getting a facial at $650 in order to jet off to Paris looking impossibly fresh. She'd cleanse and tone my skin before applying a TCA peel to sterilize it ahead of the microneedling. I don't even know what TCA peel is, but in any case, she's going through it. Then she'd apply a numbing agent, in this case lidocaine, for 20 minutes while I sat under an LED lamp. This just makes the microneedling more comfortable for the deer. All this to get the impossibly fresh glow. Let's have a look at the end and see the difference. I didn't really see any positive improvement, but anyway, she claims to. Followed by a second round of TCA to sterilize an alginate mask, which is a thick mask that dries up to a rubber-like consistency and then peeled off for elasticity and some moisturizer to finish it off. She warned me ahead of time to expect about 24 hours of redness and downtime, so I made sure to clear my plans. Well, yeah, you had plans to go out there protesting being oppressed, I'm sure. You cleared them for your $650 facial. At first, I was a little nervous about the prospect of microneedling. I mean, think about this for a sec. These women are so entitled, and they go through all these processes just needling their faces to look impossibly fresh. And why? Because it pays. You have to look like a innocent, fresh, young victim in order to get the maximum value out of your so-called myth of oppression. Your myth of oppression. So they'll go through all this stuff, and it pays very dearly for people like Kim Kardashian. I had another negative experience with another celebrity-endorsed facial, this Kim Kardashian thing, which she later too came to regret. It left my face beet red and scary looking for 4 days and after the treatment, so I prepared myself for another half week of tomato face just in case. Such is the urge to seek ever more power by drawing upon the neoteny of young femaleness. This is what they're attracted to. Neoteny is powerful. It's female superpower. If you're not sure what neoteny is, then have a look at the video on this channel from Karen Fraun, who spoke on exactly that topic in Ottawa about 3-4 years ago, when there's a full video of it on this channel. Studio Burley. Let's read on. I took home the cleanser, 2 serums, and a small microneedler to use at home. I was instructed to not wear makeup for 24 hours. Oh, the poor dear, not wear makeup for the sacrifices. Incredible. To keep my skin hydrated and the hydrating serum, and told that I'd start to see the full effect in a few days. After 2 weeks, I could start using the microneedle and the EGF serum to keep up the effects. And if you need a fresh supply of sexually mutilated babies to provide the skin cells for this. I'm now a week out and can safely say this is the best facial I've ever gotten in my life. And there's no need to clutch at pearls, at torturing babies. No, that would be clutching at pearls. It's also worth it because some 20-something young girl seeking more power by accentuating her neoteny has got a perfect glow on her way to Paris. These are the feminists who dominate the media in our country, and they dominate all the politics in our countries, and they're starting to dominate business. They dominate every aspect of our culture, including the legal system. These are the people, the feminists. Reading from the top. I know that the idea of injecting foreskin cells into your skin is enough to give even someone with the strongest stomach heebie-jeebies. But trust me, it's not that big of a deal. Not for her. For the baby, it hurts like hell. Consider the EGF facial like that delicious buttery croissant you love to indulge in. Vanity comes to mind. Narcissism. Cruelty, complete self-centeredness, excessive privileges spilling out of every pore of her body. These are the words that come to mind when she writes about her $650 penis facial. It's got cells harvested from strange places in it. Yeah, strange places. The mutilated member of a baby. But you're going to look like Kate Blanchett afterward. And that makes it worth it, right? Ask the baby if it's worth it. Have a look at the video of a newborn baby getting genitally mutilated. And tell me your frickin' glow, it makes it worth it. All that you had to suffer through to get your perfect glow for your trip to Paris. I have absolutely no respect for these people. These feminists don't deserve anyone's respect in our culture. They have lied to us for the entire time of their existence, all the years of lies and manipulation and abuse and the incredible insensitivity and cruelty that lives inside feminists. It cannot be exaggerated. They say it in their own words. We just have to hear it. Here she is. This is the before picture. This is the after picture. What can I say? I don't see anything worth $650 in there. I don't even see anything worth $6 in there. But she's willing to say it's clutching at pearls to be concerned that you're dismembering or you're genitally mutilating a baby boy in order to get this. This is the kind of person who thinks it's clutching at pearls to be using babies' foreskins for her facial, to be concerned about that. Well, let's move on. Here's another. Some of this stuff is a result of the sheer nonsense and narcissism that has been inflicted upon us because of our culture being dominated by feminism. And it's feminism, make no mistake about it, that brought about that popularized critical race theory, which was, I think, just critical theory in the early days from Marcuse in the Frankfurt School prior to World War II. But feminists and Marxists kind of joined leagues in the 1960s, and they used those original ideas of the Marcuse school of thought with critical theory and transformed it into critical race theory. And the entire edifice of feminist deceit is about unhinging, unmooring the intellectual structures that have given stability to Western culture. They undermine the intellectual principles at every stage. The idea that there's principles to be relied upon, like regular math, for instance. Now we have feminist math. We have feminist glaciology. All of these things divorce evidence, logic, and fact from emotion and feeling in favor of the feelings. And here now we have things like this. This fellow, some actor here who produces television shows for children, and he's quite popular, I'm told. I didn't know of him before, but I thought this was worth commenting on before we get into the effect of critical race theory and the racism that's rising rapidly against white people in the West. I just want to go by tree. This guy who's influential to young kids is convinced that basically there's no difference between us and trees. Let's have a look at what he says. He has a popular live show with kids where he responds to them. I think it's on Instagram Live or something like that. The Love, Simon, star, opened up about sexuality and gender pronouns in an intimate Instagram Live session on Tuesday. When a fan asked if Lonsdale was gay, the actor was surprised to keep getting that question. Now it just depends on the day. This is the result of unmoored philosophy in our culture. It depends on the day if he's gay or not. Now, apparently, feminists also claim that you're born gay. It's not something you choose. But for him, he's born gay, but it depends on the day. I suppose which day it is depends how he was born. Retroactively into the past, I suppose. Sometimes I'm gay, sometimes I feel straight, sometimes I'm not anything. Lonsdale said in a Instagram Live, it doesn't matter. Either way, throughout all of that, I'm Kainan. Let's read on. Lonsdale further explains, I don't want to go by he anymore. I just want to go by tree. You can't make this stuff up, folks. This is the result of absolute unhinged, unanchored philosophical state of the West, thanks to feminism. Because we all come from trees. So it doesn't matter if you're a he or a she or a they or a them. At the end of the day, everyone's a tree. I want to call my friends tree and me tree and everyone tree. So I think like now, when people ask me what my preferred pronoun is, I'm going to say tree. This is insanity. This is pure insanity. This is the result of the 20 or 30 or 40 years of feminists insisting that everybody gets an A, everybody is right, everybody's feelings are correct, whatever you think is true today. They're not teaching you anything, not teaching you how to think. If you taught them how to think, you'd realize you're not really a tree. In fact, the whole purpose of mental growth is to discriminate between things in reality. The whole purpose of the mind is to make accurate, discriminatory analysis of the world around you. Part of that analysis, that usually starts around 2 or 3 years old, is to say what is a tree and what is not a tree. And a 2-year-old can probably, or a 3-year-old, can probably tell you what is not a tree. So maybe this Lonsdale fellow should ask a 2 or 3-year-old if he's a tree or not. In any case, Lonsdale concluded the Instagram live remarks by saying, "I'm not high, by the way, this is just me." This is actually disturbing. I mean, if he said he was high, that would kind of explain things a bit. But to say that this is really who you are, a tree, and we all come from trees, there's something seriously wrong with this dude. If he is indeed a dude. Can trees be dudes? I don't know. When I was growing up, if you said you were a bird, and there was a book called Birdie, you would have rightly been referred to a psychoanalyst, because you're not a bird. And you're even less a tree. Let's move on. I think I may have I've finished up on that particular topic. So let's go on to the meat of the show here today. Which is critical race theory. We'll start right in on that. And we'll start out as this is the college fix. Again, all of the links are in the description. I do recommend you read all of these things, any of the ones that you're particularly interested in, because I do not cover the whole article. I just pull out a few talking points on them. Critical race theory, says College Fix, whiteness reach new, absurd, and inane heights. Yeah, and it's not going to stop, folks. This is the sad part. These people are truly serious about it. They're truly mentally ill. I mean, if mental illness has something to do with a disconnect between the reality of the world around you and what you think the world is like, I think that's psychosis is a clear and distinct disconnect, a complete disconnect between what you think, the world you think you live in, and the world you actually do live in. And this is a complex topic all of its own. I can't pretend to accurately summarize all of, or even a significant portion of what psychosis really is. But your mind makes an image of the world. And then you interact with the world according to the image you hold in your mind of that world. When the image you have of in your mind that you think the world is like is dramatically in conflict with the world around you or just doesn't fit at all, we call that a kind of mental illness. So it is not an exaggeration to say that our culture is going mentally ill. Our culture encourages mental illness in susceptible or impressionable people, particularly the young. I'm fortunate enough to be old enough that it hadn't got going in full steam ahead before I had formed a reasonably stable and sane traditional view of the world, which includes that the world has some objectivity to it. It does have a lot of objectivity to it. But in any case, let's have a look at how the College Fix views some of the current progress of our culture's insanity. Reading from the top. What is most arresting about critical race theory is that it turns its back on the Western tradition of rational inquiry, forswearing analysis for narrative. Rather than martial logical arguments and empirical data, critical race theorists tell stories. Fictional, science fictional, quasi-fictional, autobiographical, anecdotal, designed to expose the pervasive and debilitating racism of America today. By repudiating reasoned argumentation, the storytellers reinforce stereotypes about the intellectual capacities of non-whites. This is written by a Court of Appeals judge, Richard Posner. And the interesting thing, as the article points out, he wrote these words 20 years ago when critical race theory was hardly a thing. If he uttered these words today, no doubt radical educationalists would try to hound him out of the judiciary with the full force of cancel culture, no doubt. Critical race theory is a con. It's a complete con. It's going to cause it is causing enormous damage in our world, and it is leading young people, even in the university, into a kind of mental illness from which it will be very difficult for them to recover. So, let's read from the top here. Nevertheless, he is absolutely correct. The basis for critical race theory means that it can be used to justify anything an academic, or anyone really, sees fit. Probably the most common term to spring forth from the ideology is whiteness, the definition of which also can mean anything. And they've been doing this for quite some time, as you know. And what the judge pointed out is that it's storytelling. It can be fictional, science fictional, or fantasy altogether. This is what's happened for the result of feminists completely unmooring the intellectual basis for our understanding of reality around us from evidence and fact and logical reasoning. This is literally the feminists driving our culture into insanity. Let's read on. Readers of the College Fix have seen how, quote, whiteness must be demilitarized. And those are links underlined there, and each of these links go to some very good articles which are likely worth reading. I did not reach through all of them, but I intend to go back and read some of these because this is quite important, I think. In order to make white people human again, whiteness must be demilitarized in order to make white people human again. This is according to the critical race theorists and the feminists propagating this stuff, where the University of Minnesota offered a 12-step recovery plan for whiteness. And they're calling white people racist as they write these things. An elementary school lesson on whiteness which claimed sympathy with law enforcement is racist. And a Trinity College professor and a speaker at Barry College who both equated whiteness with terrorism. This is a cult, I think. It's a cult of insanity. It's a cult where any story you can dream up in your head, you can say actually represents reality. This is Alice in Wonderland. A professor even said the concept of time is racist. We've gone over a lot of this stuff in the past on the Fumango File and on different live streams and videos. More recently, Fordham University's Tyler Stovall has a new book out about the concept of freedom being defined in racial terms by French and American intellectuals, and who also conceived of liberty as an aspect of privilege of whiteness. This I find really important too. They conceived of liberty as an aspect and privilege of whiteness. And they think about this, folks. They are trying to eliminate whiteness. We are told even by Coca-Cola to try to be less white. They equate liberty as an act of whiteness, a concept of whiteness, aspect of whiteness. And what are they doing, the left? They are trying to eliminate your liberties. They've used the coronavirus to eliminate your liberties. They are trying to push forward the Great Reset, all of which will eliminate your liberties. They are trying to disarm. Look at this one here. Biden administration, this is March 23rd, 2 days ago. Biden administration urges Supreme Court to let cops enter homes and seize guns without a warrant. What is they saying here? Conceived of liberty as an aspect and privilege of whiteness. And whiteness, they've convinced the majority of our public, our culture, to believe that whiteness is the problem. That the problem is whiteness. They've used these exact words. You have to be less white. Try to be less white. We have to eliminate whiteness. And what is they saying is a connection to whiteness? Your liberty. And what are they trying to do? Right from the White House, the president himself of the U.S. is trying to get the Supreme Court to take away your liberties. All of everything that's been going on in the last year and more, but very much more strongly in the last year, has been an attack on your liberties. This is a serious period of history we're going through here, folks, and it's not going to end well. Let's have a look at what this is. The Examiner, I think. I can't remember the name of this article here, but the link is in the description, or the place for this article. Arizona Education Department encourages talking to babies about racism. This is interesting too. Says 3 months old can be racist, but not just any 3 months old. And I think you can determine and guess for yourself which cohort of 3-year-olds, 3 months old, are the real racists. I'm going to pause for a moment here and recognize Sean Tower. Thanks, Sean, for your generous donation to Studio Relay. I always appreciate it. And Sean says, if people think this has no real life implications, think again. Here in New Brunswick, that's New Brunswick NB, I believe, or is it Nebraska? You can clear that up in the comments. I think that's New Brunswick. They are giving vaccines partly based on race. Yeah. And the Trump, not Trump administration, but the Biden administration has, or rather the lefties, the Democrats in Seattle, Washington state, are giving out support checks only to black businesses, black and minority businesses. So yeah, the Western culture has 100% swung over to systemic racism. This is systemic racism against white people. It is coming from the authorities. Now, Arizona, let's have a look at this article. It just came out about March? Yeah, about 3 weeks ago or so. Yeah, so Sean says it is New Brunswick, Canada. Reading from the top with me, if you will. I should, that's pretty, is that big enough to see there? Put it in the comments, but I'll explain this up for the moment. The Arizona Department of Education has purportedly created an equity toolkit that teaches parents how children as young as 3 months can develop racial bias and encourages parents and teachers to talk to young children about race. Let's read on. Honestly, I'm very suspicious of this study because I've never seen anything like this. I don't believe it, that children are getting absorbing racism at 3 months old. But in any case, children do absorb things like a sponge. Let's read from the top. But I'm also suspicious of the study designers. An infographic included with the tweet shows how children's racial attitudes evolve from birth to age 6, with newborn babies showing no racial preferences but starting to develop one as early as 3 months old. By 5, Black and Latinx, that's not even a word that Latin people use, by the way. This is just another part of these inventions of these racist, sexist, feminists, leftists. Black and Latinx children in research settings show no preference towards their own groups compared to whites. White children at this age remain strongly biased in favor of whiteness. I could have predicted that this would be the result of their study before they even started the study. It's just like every feminist study. The conclusion is written before they do the work that more needs to be done for women. Under the subtext is by men, of course. If it's being done for women, it's not being done by women. But that's the conclusion of absolutely every single feminist, quote, study ever invented. So, let me expand this up for you here. Reading from the top. While students may need to be reassured that they did not ask to be white, just let the sense of that that sentence just sink in. And they roll these kinds of sentences off their lips as if it's everyday stuff, just like you would have a true racist back in the days of slavery would have rolled anti-black stuff off their lips without a second's thought. They're doing this today. While students may need to be reassured that they did not ask to be white, they're kind of admitting that, in fact, people in this culture at this stage are getting the message that it's not okay to be white. So why else would you say students may need to be reassured that they did not ask to be white? Think about this. This is insanity. You're really admitting that you're the problem. You are pushing racism out at children. Now you want to start in preschool. They should also know that the reality in which they are embedded ascribes unearned privilege to their whiteness. This is pure feminist conjecture. Absolute nonsense. But they're taking it as true. They are building an entire theory of white guilt out of thin air. White racism. This is a racist theory that they are creating out of thin air, and this is part of why they need to disconnect our culture from a reliance upon fact, logic, and reason, because they are not using fact. They can't use fact, logic, and reason and support this kind of bigoted, racist, sexist theory that feminists come up with. Reading on, the resource notes. It is through seeing themselves in a larger radicalized context that white people can begin to understand how they can work to change racism and change what it means to be white. This is like white people lecturing the slaves. History is not going to be kind to feminists, but our immediate future is being dominated by the most racist, bigoted, violent, vile creatures that have ever spread through the Western world. That's the feminists and the leftists. Reading from the top. The resource says that white people throw in terms, quote, such as the race card, black on black crime, reverse racism, and colorblindness as a way to alleviate some of their white fragility. They can, like the judge pointed out early in this section, that you can rationalize absolutely anything. Anyone can rationalize absolutely anything using critical race theory. White fragility. So are they like, how should we refer to black on black crime? They don't have a problem with us talking about white on white crime. That's just the lowly white people doing it. That doesn't matter. Let's read on. These are made up terms that white people use to feel better about themselves. No, they're terms that refer to a specific, measurable, factual aspect of our culture. Black on black crime is real. The term black on black crime refers to, unsurprisingly, black on black crime, just like the words say. While the resource says it's a good thing for white people to have had children, partners, and friends of color, it warns that those relationships do not give you a one-way ticket out of racism town. There's no ticket out of racism town if you're a white person. That's the definition that feminists have created. The definition is whiteness. If you're white, you're racist, according to feminists. And that's why they cannot allow logic and fact and reasoning to enter into any of their theory. If you can call it theory. It's really fantasy. Feminist ideology is fantasy, pure and simple. It has to be fantasy, or they can't make it support all of their rationale for, if you can call it that, their racism and their sexism. Let's read on. And this, I got into a Twitter spat with this fellow here, and talking about, I think it was the Boulder, Colorado thing, or the one of the two mass murders recently, multiple murders. This guy says, a little too late for that. Anyways, reparations for black Americans, please. We built this country. I contested that statement strongly. And we got into a little Twitter feed back and forth. This fellow turns out to be a dentist, and he wants reparations. He is a black fellow who claims to be suffering from the effects of history, and the U.S. supported him, and he was able to become a dentist. And now if the dentists are anything like in Canada, they'll make hundreds of $1,000s a year unless he's an absolutely useless, incompetent dentist. But he wants reparations for the color of his skin. He wants to be paid because he has black skin on top of what he gets paid to be a dentist. But let's have a look at some of his other choice comments. And these are the kinds of people who latch on to these racist theories like whiteness and white fragility and white guilt that come from critical race theory. They latch on to this for self-serving reasons. But who is this guy? Here's his multiple times. I didn't copy all of these out, but this went back and forth a few times. He says, "You're welcome, white bitch." This is a guy who's calling white people racist. "You're welcome, white bitch." I don't even know how many times he called me such kinds of slurs. Clear, complete racist guy this guy is. And I responded to him in this particular instance as saying, "Thank you for confirming your racism. You are part of the problem. You." And I sincerely believe that. Absolutely. These calls for reparations are being made by people who have not suffered directly from slavery at all. And most of them are being called for from people like him, people with very good salaries, from a country that helped him get those professions. But I had a look at his Twitter feed before I blocked him because he's an obnoxious, racist idiot. "Only white people think this shit is cute." That's one of his tweets. "This is the root of why we have white supremacy." I guarantee you this guy had nothing but support from the white people in his life, all his life, though he'll never admit it, because he is profoundly racist narcissist. Read on. "What the flying F? White males on this crazy shit. This man is a loser." He has multiple tweets, many of which, not all, but many of which reveal his profound bigotry and racism. And all of this, folks, we're going to expect a lot more of this in the future because the feminists and the leftists are whipping up racial discord. There's a reason for this. There's a motive to their madness. And I talked about this in the coming one world government and what feminism's role in becoming one world government, and how they're using racism as part of their tools to push their agenda forward. Okay, let's go on to the next section here. And these are the shootings and how they're being portrayed in the media. 8 dead in Atlanta spa shootings with fears of anti-Asian bias. The man who police say went on a rampage at 3 spas in the Atlanta area has been charged with 8 counts of murder in connection with the attacks. Now, of course, these are terrible events. There's no other way to characterize them as terrible events. So here's a few facts that they put forward in this particular article. And who was it? At the New York Times. Well, oops, it's not going to go forward now. Bear with me a second. Why is this not? Shoot. Okay, bear with me a second, folks. Okay, here we go. The suspect in the spa attacks has been charged with 8 counts of murder. 6 of the 8 victims were women of Asian descent. President Biden says, "I know Asian Americans are very concerned." A survivor of the shooting spree called his wife had been shot. And experts warn of a rise in hate crimes motivated by male supremacy. This came out immediately. The assumption that this is motivated by male supremacy. Asian Americans were targeted in nearly 3,800 hate incidents in the past year. I don't know, I didn't verify this, but I'm very suspicious of how they classify statistics now. We can't trust the people in power. We can't trust them for being politically unbiased and accurate in their counting of statistics, much less their reporting of the counting of statistics. Some officer was relieved from the case because of some remarks he made. I didn't go into the details of that. So let's read from the article. The brazen shootings, which took the lives of 6 Asian women of Asian descent, stirred considerable outrage and fear in the Asian American community. Investigators said they had not ruled out bias as a motivating factor, even as the suspect denied such racial animus once in custody. The suspect told police that he had a sexual addiction and had carried out the shootings at the massage parlors to eliminate his temptation, authorities said on Wednesday. He also said that he had frequented massage parlors in the past and launched the attacks as a form of vengeance. All but one of the victims were women, the police said. Whatever the motivation was for this guy, we know that the majority of victims were Asian, Ms. Bottoms said. We also know that this is an issue that is happening across the country. It is unacceptable. It is hateful. It has to stop. Surely it has to stop, of course. But notice how they are emphasizing both that this is I went backwards again. Now it's paused on me. That this is a male supremacy. They're throwing that right in there right off the bat. And they're making an issue out of the fact that the women are all Asian. There's no evidence to say that this guy was targeting Asians, but he was targeting massage parlors. Just so happens that possibly the majority of massage parlors are Asian. Now I'm going to have to open this up again because it crashed on me. Let's see where we're at here. But he admitted that he had a sexual addiction, and he was trying to eliminate his temptation. So we'll get a little bit further into this a little later, because this guy is not well mentally, that's for sure. And this is going to be a part of one of the points I really want to make here, is that here's a guy who is clearly not mentally well. He's mentally ill, you would say. The police arrested Mr. Long, who is white. Of course, they have to point that out. And I'm not against some people pointing out the race or color of a person, of a suspect. It's relevant in catching and solving crimes most of the time. It's kind of ridiculous to not use that information. Let's read on. They had earlier released a surveillance of an image of a suspect near a Hyundai Tucson near the massage parlors. Mr. Baker said that Long had admitted to the shootings and that he appeared to be acting alone. Rodney Bryant, the acting chief of the Atlanta Police Department, said it was not yet clear whether the shooting spree would be classified as a hate crime. We are still early in the investigation. We're just not sure yet. That didn't stop the media, though, from speculating on that. Vice President Kamala Harris, the first woman and first Asian American to hold office, expressed condolences for the families of the victims. Now, they're making a lot to do, and I find this weird, of Kamala Harris being Asian. Now, you know as well as I do that when the media uses the word Asian, they don't mean all Southeast Asians like East Indians. Usually, East Indians are treated or pointed out separately. When the media, when people in the culture say Asian, they mean Oriental Asian. But now they're trying to add in this idea that Kamala Harris is Asian in the way of Oriental Asian. Kamala Harris is another story all of her own. In his first primetime speech as president last week, marking the year of the coronavirus pandemic, Mr. Biden denounced vicious hate crimes against Asian Americans who have been attacked, harassed, blamed, and scapegoated. So there's a lot of talk about this as hate crimes. A lot of this is being portrayed right off the bat as hate crimes. The police say they caught the subject when he was on his way to Florida. They were able to track his phone with his parents called to tip. So his parents, his parents gave the tip in that led to him being caught. So his parents knew that there was something wrong here. Gender-motivated hate crime make up only a tiny percentage of hate crimes recorded by the FBI, 0.7% in 2018, compared with 57.5% deemed to have been motivated by racial bias that year. But increasingly, organizations that study and track hate groups and violence have warned the phenomenon called male supremacy terrorism. This is the second time that they refer to this. Well, second or third time that they're referring to it. Our media has a, I'll say it, they are obsessed with pinning everything on men, specifically white men, and making them look as bad as possible, even when there's thinnest of connections, if any connection at all, to the issue at hand. And this is, they're saying, driven by aggrieved male entitlement. You know where that comes from? Michael Kimmel, the aggrieved white male. He works out of, I think it's Sunnybrook Hospital, a professor there who opened a male studies program. It's not a male study of males, it's a study of feminists, how feminists view male, and Michael Kimmel is a feminist. And he wrote, I think, a book titled Angry White Man. Now imagine that this is the guy who is supposed to be counseling and advising the country on the state of masculinity and maleness in the West. And these are the kinds of people who end up writing these articles off of the work based by Michael Kimmel in Sunnybrook University, and Michael Flood in Australia, he's another one. So-called involuntary celibates have been banned from social media for threatening violence and blah. They got right into the incel thing here, began to track male supremacist ideology. They go into quite some detail. I'm not going to bother reading the rest of that. And according to a brief, the International for Counterterrorism, the ideology's core beliefs are men are entitled to sexual access to women, and feminists are a malevolent force controlling society at the expense of men. They really dug for this. And blah, blah, blah. They go on with some more stuff. I'm just going to skip over it. And they're making a big deal out of this, even though this guy's not part of the incel group. This fellow from the Korean Christian Conservative group says, I still remember when a Korean murderer shot and killed 32 people at Virginia Tech, 21 of them being white. Was that an example of Korean supremacy? Was Koreanness responsible for that psychotic mass shooting? Clearly not. But clearly this is not either. But it is being portrayed as that. And feminists in the media can be counted on every single time to portray this as male supremacy, of which all men are culpable, and as white supremacy, as all white people are culpable. Now let's have a look at what this heavy.com has to say about the Atlanta Asian spa shooting suspect. A few facts here. Long has been described as a zealously religious person who claimed to be targeted Asian women to eliminate temptation. His initial plan was to kill himself. Then he decided to help others with sex addiction by targeting massage parlors, he told law enforcement, according to CNN. Officials said there was no evidence of illegal activity at the targeted massage parlors. So he was targeting massage parlors in order to protect other people, in his distorted mind, from temptation. And he was a very religious person. So this starts to make sense, and it's painting an entirely different picture than this guy being a male supremacist or an incel or a white supremacist or any of those things. And it has painted a picture of this not being racially motivated, as the president of the US implied and as the media implied. But that doesn't stop them, because the media and the president and the lefties have an agenda to portray white people, men in particular, as the source of all evil in our culture. And this case didn't line up to that, but they'll still push it. And this is some comment from a student in his class. He was sort of nerdy, didn't seem violent from what I remember. He was a hunter and his father was a youth minister or pastor. He was big into religion. Super nice, super Christian, very quiet, he thought. He brought a Bible to school every day and walked down the hallway with it in his hands. So you can see that if he is that style of Christian, which is very puritanical, and sort of views the world in terms of temptations and resisting temptations to be a good Christian, then his inability to control his sexual appetite, having, I believe, used these massage parlors in the past, he is a conflicted person. He's what we would call mentally ill. And remember this term, mentally ill. It is not used to describe him, but it is exactly what the portrait is starting to appear as. A guy who's conflicted in his self with his desire to be a good Christian and his dealing with the very real urges, sexual urges, of which he's apparently partaken in, and then he got angry and blamed the massage parlors, the women, for being the source of temptation. This is not male supremacy. This is not white supremacy. It's none of those things. It's not racism. This is mental illness. It's a pretty clear sign of mental illness. But let's move on. Long was also involved with the church's student ministry team as recently as 2018. According to minutes from a meeting of the elders, he was one of 11 people who served as members of the team, which exists to see students receive Christ as Lord and walk in Him, being rooted in faith. So, as you can see, a guy who has succumbed to his urges in massage parlors would be in conflict with this ideal that he has set for himself and he has accepted as the true and the right way. And that conflict pushed him in a direction where he considered suicide and then considered taking out the source of temptation. Mental illness, to me, pretty clear. Now, let's have a look at Boulder, Colorado incident. Well, I have to close a couple of these down here, folks, so bear with me a second. Did that go up or no? All right, bear with me a second here. Okay. This is at the beginning. Sorry about the interruption there, folks. This is at the beginning of this, when this first broke in the news and where the Boulder, Colorado shooting happened. And the Boulder, Colorado, if you remember, was in a supermarket or something like that. And I think there were 10 people killed. Here's Amy Siskine says, the shooter was taken into custody. In other words, it was almost certainly a white man. Again, she says. If he were black or brown, he would be dead. Well, that's not true at all. But this is the kind of thing that's coming out immediately as a presumption by people like Amy Siskine. Let's have a look at her. Here is her tweet superimposed with a couple of other things that materialize. Police identified 21-year-old Ahmad Al-Aliwi Alisa as suspect in Boulder shooting. Amy then, the next day, comes out and says, let's mourn the victims, but not glorify the killer with the attention of having his name widely known. Suddenly, his name is inconvenient to her biased view of white men. She, unsurprisingly, is a feminist, which I will show you shortly. His name does not determine skin color. No, it doesn't. I don't know why she felt the need to say that. Nor does his religion. His skin appears white. And by the numbers, the vast majority of mass shooters are committed by white men. I don't think that's true. In fact, I think that's been debunked, especially when you factor in the overwhelmingly large numbers of white people in the culture. Let's read on. Religion and name do not determine skin color. There are Muslims who have black, brown, and white skin. There are people who come here from all around the world whose skin is white. This shooter's skin is white. In her own words, she contradicts herself. She won't use the word Islam or Muslim she won't degrade Islam or Muslimism with this crime, even though she says that they're Muslims that have white skin. What's important to her is white skin. This is the effect of critical race theory. It has legitimized the fundamental racism of these people. They are using critical race theory to legitimize, to justify their abject hatred of white men. Here she is, activist, feminist, author, and racist, and sexist bigot. Here she is again, activist, feminist, author, and she forgot to add sexist, bigot, racist. Let's read on. Here she is. She calls herself defender of democracy, activist for women's rights, advocate for LGBTQ+. I'm not surprised. Amy Siskine is best known for author of the Weekly List and as president of the New Agenda, a nonprofit dedicated to the advancement of women. And the Weekly List was her compilement. She had an obsession with Trump. Every week she listed out every inconvenient, every misstep, every mispronunciation of President Trump through his presidency. That's an obsession. And she was probably celebrated in the West for that. Now, the inconvenient truth of this shooter, as many of you probably know, that the alleged shooter was a Washington Post reader. He was also Islamic, and he was he had preached anti-Western ideas and kind of, jihadish ideas, who shared the paper's hatred of Donald Trump. And yet they tried to portray him as a far-right guy, of course, in the beginning. When the Boulder, this I got off of Facebook, thank you for whoever I forget was posted that. When the Boulder shooter was assumed to be white, they called it terrorism. They are not calling it terrorism now that it's known he is Syrian. Now they're calling the guy a white guy. He had a criminal act, so he must be white. So in the insightful words of Titania McGrath, all criminals are white, especially when they're not. That's the leftist world we live in. And here, remember how they made a big deal in the Atlanta shooting that the majority of the victims were Asian. The majority were Asian women. I think 6 out of 8. That's 3/4. Well, have a look at this picture, if you will. Now, this is Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, significantly white community. But 100% of the 10 victims are white. All of them. And yet they did not use the term hate crime. They did not, even though the fellow has expressed Islamic jihadist thoughts against the West and hated Trump. Probably, I could assume if he hated Trump and had anti-Western thoughts, he probably saw the West as being white supremacist. And lo and behold, every last one of his victims was white. There's another picture of them with their names and ages here. Let me see if I can expand that up a little bit for you. And the media did not say anything about racism, bigotry, Islamic supremacism, or jihadism or terrorism according to this case. The bias in the media today is absolutely unreal. And immediately, Facebook scrubs a page showing the supermarket shooter was anti-Trump, pro-refugee activist. So not only was the anti-Trump, pro-refugee leftist, Facebook immediately scrubbed that information out. Doesn't fit the narrative. This fellow, Al Issa, was arrested after killing 10 people, including a police officer, during a rampage inside King Soopers grocery store yesterday afternoon. Al Issa, who was born Syrian and migrated to the United States, made posts in 2018 in which he stated, "Trump is such a dick," while blaming racism for his victory. So the guy is blaming racism, and we know what that means. It means white supremacy style racism, for Trump's victory, stewed in that for 5 years, 4.5 years, goes out and kills 10 white people, and they're still not calling it a hate crime or terrorism. The gunmen also shared a PBS article with the text, "Why Refugees and Immigrants Are Good for America," while also accusing racist, Islamophobic people of hacking his phone. Wow. So he has deliberately and consistently acted in a racist way, blaming Islamophobic people and Trump for all his problems, kills 10 white people, and we're not going to suspect it as a hate crime. Read from the top. The fact that Al Issa was a Muslim doesn't mean that ordinary, hard-working, law-abiding Muslim Americans share any blame for the tragedy. No, of course it doesn't. That's only if he's a white man who did the crime. Then all white people have to share the blame, especially white men. They all have to be browbeaten. We have to be re-educated. We have to re-educate our children. Think about it, folks. We're being told, as white people, that we have to educate our children at 3 months old against their propensity to be racist. And when any of these crimes happen, yes, they smear all white people, all men. But here, they specifically go out of their way to say, rightly, okay, we shouldn't be smearing all white people and all men either. But they rightly pointed out here that we shouldn't be, doesn't mean that ordinary, hard-working, law-abiding Muslim Americans share any blame for the tragedy. However, if he had been white, it's guaranteed the media would have exploited the bloodshed to push their ceaseless narrative about the threat posed by white supremacy. The media is the problem in the West. Well, because the media is dominated by left-wing feminists. Here's the guy. What can I say? Now, let's have a look how CNN portrayed the Boulder massacre tragedy here. He'll stay in jail as his attorney gets time to assess what she says is his mental illness. The guy is Islamic. He's from Syria, has a record of complaining about Islamophobia, hated Trump, calls the problems in the West as a racist because of white racism of white people. And they're immediately in the headline putting forth the idea that he's mentally ill. It's not terrorism, it's not a hate crime, it's mental illness now. With the other fellow, it's hatred, and all white men need to share in the blame. With this fellow, it's his mental illness. Let's read on. Investigators have been examining possible mental health questions in the case. A law enforcement official briefed on the investigation previously told CNN on condition of anonymity. Elisa's brother, who also claimed Elisa may have been suffering from mental illness. Authorities have said they are still trying to determine a motive in the shooting. And they're trying to figure out why the shooting happened in that particular location, according to the law enforcement official who told CNN about investigators' checks into his mental illness. They referred to mental illness 8 times in this one article. 8 times. Mental illness is a kind of a get out of jail free card. It means it's not a hate crime. It means it's not racism, it's not bigotry, because he's not a white man. 8 times here, where she called her mental illness here, 2, 3, 4. Cannot begin to assess the nature and depth of Alisa's mental illness until we have discovery from the government. 5. This was the first time Harold publicly said anything about her client's mental health. That was 6. However, investigators have been examining possible mental health questions in this case. That was 7. Alyssa's brother also claimed Alyssa may have been suffering mental illness. That's 8. Oh, sorry, that was 7. The law enforcement official who told CNN about investigators checks into mental illness. So, when you put mental into the search of that article, 8 instances. And in the Boulder, when you put illness into it, 6 instances. Now when you go into the Atlanta shooting and you put mental into the search key, you have 0 instances. They do not mention mental or illness or mental health even once from the same CNN in the Atlanta shooting, because he's a confirmed white male. There's not one reference or hint that there was anything mentally ill about this guy, even though, in the CNN article, even though it is clear that there is a conflict between his Christian, deep, fundamentalist, kind of puritanical beliefs and his inability to withhold from his temptations. And his suicidal thoughts. There's not one mention of mental illness in that case, and there's 8 mentions when they talk about the Boulder, Colorado case, because the fellow cannot be classified fully as a white man, even though they tried their best. Many people tried their best to call him a white man. So folks, that is all I have for you today. It was great to be back online. I want to thank you all for joining me as usual. And like I often like to say at the end of these shows, do something you love every single day. If you don't have something you love to do, find something you love to do, because this is a really important part of your mental health. It's your life. No matter how bad and weird and psychotic the culture gets around you, you can still enjoy your life. I play the piano and practice piano and ride my motorcycle. Those 2 things give me immense joy. So until that, I hope to see you guys again next time on Coffee with Steve. See you soon.